She stood in the rain outside a house she had cleaned for 2 years, holding a bag filled with her uniforms, her hands shaking, her dignity stripped away in front of a man who wouldn't even let her explain. Celeste Monroe was 31 years old, a single mother of 2, and until 15 minutes ago, she had a job that kept her family off the streets. Now she had nothing. And the worst part? She hadn't done anything wrong. The woman who destroyed her life was standing upstairs behind a curtain, watching the whole thing unfold, smiling. Because everything had gone exactly according to plan. This is the story of how a wealthy woman used a poor woman's desperation as a weapon, how she turned trust into a trap, and how the truth eventually caught up with her in a way she never expected. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how all of this unfolded, we need to go back to where it started. Celeste Monroe grew up in a small apartment in southeast Atlanta with her grandmother, Miss Opal, who raised her after Celeste's mother passed away when she was only 7. Miss Opal was a church woman, a hard woman in the best sense of the word. She taught Celeste that work was sacred, that no honest job was beneath you, and that the only thing a person truly owned in this world was their name. Celeste carried those lessons with her through everything. She graduated high school, got a certificate in hospitality services at a community college, and worked odd jobs cleaning offices, hotels, and eventually private homes. By the time she was 29, she had 2 children. A 5-year-old daughter named Amira and a 3-year-old son named Josiah. Their father, a man named Langston, had walked out when Josiah was 6 months old. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone. Celeste didn't have time to fall apart. She had 2 mouths to feed, daycare to pay for, and rent that came due whether she was ready or not. So she worked. She worked double shifts. She cleaned houses during the day and folded laundry at a hotel in Buckhead at night. She was tired in a way most people never experience, the kind of tired that sits in your bones and doesn't leave even after you sleep. But she kept going because her children needed her to keep going. In the spring of that year, Celeste got a referral from one of her regular clients. A woman named Vivian Ashford was looking for a full-time housekeeper for her home in Alpharetta, a sprawling 5-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac that looked like something out of a magazine. Vivian's husband, Kellen Ashford, was a commercial real estate developer. He had built his business from the ground up over 12 years, flipping small properties, taking smart risks, and eventually landing deals that put him in a completely different tax bracket. Their home, 2 luxury vehicles, and a vacation house in Hilton Head were all products of his work. Vivian hadn't worked a traditional job in years. She managed the house, planned dinner parties, posted curated photos of her life on social media, and spent afternoons at brunch with a rotating group of women who seemed more like an audience than actual friends. When Celeste first met Vivian during the interview, she thought the woman was warm and generous. Vivian smiled a lot, complimented Celeste's references, and told her the job came with good pay, flexible hours, and even occasional bonuses during holidays. For someone in Celeste's position, it sounded almost too good to be true. And maybe that should have been the first warning. But Celeste wasn't in a position to question good fortune. She needed the money. She took the job. For the first several months, things were fine. Celeste would arrive at the house around 8 in the morning, after dropping Amira and Josiah off at daycare. She cleaned, organized, did laundry, prepared light meals when Vivian asked, and left by 4:30 in the afternoon. The pay was consistent, the work was manageable, and Vivian treated her well enough on the surface. Kellen was rarely home during the day. He left early for his office downtown and didn't come back until evening. On the occasion Celeste did see him, he was polite but distant, the kind of man who said good morning and meant it but didn't linger for conversation. Celeste respected that. She wasn't there to socialize. She was there to work. Over time, though, Celeste started noticing things about the Ashford household that most people wouldn't see unless they were inside it every day. The house was beautiful, but the marriage inside it was cold. Vivian and Kellen barely spoke to each other. When they were in the same room, there was a stiffness between them, like two strangers stuck in an elevator. Celeste would sometimes hear Vivian on the phone in her bedroom, talking to her friends, and the things she said about Kellen were sharp. She called him boring. She said he cared more about his properties than he did about her. She said she felt like furniture in her own house. Celeste never commented. It wasn't her place. She cleaned around the tension the same way she cleaned around the furniture. It was just part of the house. About 8 months into the job, Vivian started behaving differently towards Celeste. She became friendlier, almost uncomfortably so. She started inviting Celeste to sit down and eat lunch with her instead of eating alone in the kitchen. She asked Celeste personal questions about her life, her kids, her struggles. At first, Celeste kept her answers short. But Vivian was persistent, and over time Celeste let her guard down. She told Vivian about Langston leaving. About the bills she was behind on. About the daycare threatening to drop Josiah because she owed 2 months' tuition. Vivian listened with wide eyes and sympathetic nods. She even gave Celeste an extra $300 one week and told her it was just because she wanted to help. Celeste almost cried. She went home that night and paid the daycare bill and bought Amira a pair of shoes she'd been asking about for weeks. It felt like Vivian genuinely cared. And maybe part of her did, but not in the way Celeste thought. Now I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone was being kind to you, but you later found out their kindness had conditions attached to it? That their generosity wasn't really generosity at all but an investment in something they wanted from you? Think about that for a moment. Because that's exactly where Celeste was standing without even knowing it. It was a Thursday afternoon in October when Vivian brought it up for the first time. Celeste was folding towels in the laundry room when Vivian came in and closed the door behind her. She had a glass of wine in her hand even though it was barely 1 o'clock. She leaned against the dryer and said she needed to talk to Celeste about something personal. Celeste stopped folding and looked at her. Vivian took a sip of her wine and then she laughed, softly, like she was about to share a funny secret. She told Celeste that she and Kellen had been going through a rough patch and that she wanted to do something to test him. She called it a loyalty test. She said she wanted to see if Kellen was the kind of man who would stay faithful when temptation was right in front of him. She said she had read about women doing this online, setting up scenarios to see how their husbands would react. She said it was harmless. She said it was even healthy for the relationship because it would either confirm his loyalty or reveal a problem they needed to address. And then she asked Celeste to be the one to do it. She wanted Celeste to flirt with Kellen. To dress up one evening when Vivian pretended to be out of town. To see how far Kellen would let things go. Vivian said she would be watching the whole thing through the home security cameras and that nothing would actually happen. She framed it like a game. Like a prank. Like something they'd all laugh about later. Celeste felt her stomach drop. She immediately said no. She told Vivian that wasn't something she was comfortable with and that it didn't feel right. Vivian nodded slowly, like she understood. But she didn't drop it. Over the next 2 weeks, Vivian brought it up again and again. Each time she made it sound more reasonable. Each time she sweetened the deal. She told Celeste she would give her a $5,000 bonus if she went through with it. $5,000. That was more than 2 months of Celeste's rent. That was a new transmission for her car that had been making a grinding noise since August. That was Christmas for Amira and Josiah. Vivian could see the math happening behind Celeste's eyes, and she pressed harder. She told Celeste there was no risk. She promised that no matter what happened, Celeste's job was safe. She said it over and over again. Your job is safe. Nothing bad will happen to you. I just need to know the truth about my husband. And slowly, against every instinct her grandmother had ever taught her, Celeste agreed. Let me tell you something. Desperation doesn't make people stupid. It makes them vulnerable. And there is a difference. Celeste knew in her gut that this was wrong. But when you're a single mother staring at a stack of bills that keeps growing, when your children need things you can't provide, when someone waves $5,000 in your face and tells you all you have to do is play a role for one evening, the line between right and wrong gets blurry. It doesn't disappear. It just gets harder to see. And Vivian knew that. She counted on it. The plan was set for a Friday night in late October. Vivian told Kellen she was going to visit her sister in Savannah for the weekend. She packed a bag, made a show of leaving, and drove her car to a hotel 15 minutes away where she planned to watch everything unfold on her phone through the home security app. Meanwhile, Celeste arrived at the house around 7 that evening. Vivian had left her address, a designer piece that probably cost more than Celeste's entire wardrobe. She told Celeste to put it on, to do her hair, to look her best. Celeste changed in the guest bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked beautiful, but she felt sick. Her hands were trembling. She kept hearing Miss Opal's voice in her head telling her that a person's name was all they truly owned. But she thought about Amira and Josiah. She thought about the $5,000. And she walked downstairs. Kellen came home around 8. He walked through the front door, set his keys on the counter, and immediately noticed that something was off. The house smelled different, like perfume and candles. He walked into the living room and found Celeste sitting on the couch in a dress he had never seen before, looking like she was waiting for someone. He stopped in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Kellen asked her what was going on. Celeste tried to follow the script Vivian had given her. She smiled, told him Vivian had asked her to stay late to prepare something special for him, that she thought he deserved a relaxing evening. She offered him a drink. Kellen didn't move. He looked at her for a long time, and his expression shifted from confusion to something harder. He asked her again, slowly this time, what exactly was happening. Celeste could feel her composure cracking. She tried to keep the act going, said something about how Vivian wanted him to feel appreciated, that she was just there to help. Kellen shook his head. He told Celeste he didn't know what this was, but it didn't feel right. He said he respected her as a person and as someone who worked in his home, but whatever this was, it needed to stop right now. And then Celeste made the mistake of reaching for his arm. Not aggressively, not seductively, just a nervous reflex born out of panic because she could feel the whole thing falling apart and she didn't know what else to do. But that touch changed everything. Kellen pulled away from her like her hand was on fire. His face went tight. He told her she needed to leave. Right now. Celeste opened her mouth to explain, but he cut her off. He said he didn't want to hear it. He said he trusted her in his home, around his things, and this is what she did with that trust. His voice wasn't loud. It was controlled, measured, and that made it worse. Celeste could feel the tears building behind her eyes, but she held them. She went to the guest bathroom, changed back into her own clothes, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the front door. Kellen was standing by the kitchen counter with his arms crossed. He didn't look at her. As she reached the door, he said one more thing. He said don't come back. And just like that, 2 years of work, 2 years of showing up early and staying late and never stealing so much as a paperclip, 2 years of being reliable and professional and invisible in the way good employees often are, all of it was erased in a single evening. Celeste drove home in silence. She didn't even turn the radio on. When she got to her apartment, she sat in the car for 20 minutes before going inside. She couldn't face her children like this. She couldn't face anyone. When she finally walked in, her neighbor Mrs. Tate, who watched the kids on nights Celeste worked late, was reading Amira a bedtime story. Celeste thanked her, closed the door, and stood in her kitchen staring at the sink full of dishes. Then she cried. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. The quiet kind. The kind where your chest hurts and your mouth is open but no sound comes out because you're afraid your kids will hear you. She cried because she had done something she knew was wrong and she had lost everything because of it. And the person who had pushed her into it wasn't going to lose a single thing. Now think about this for a second. If you were in Celeste's position, what would you have done? I'm not asking what the right answer is because we all know the right answer when we're comfortable and safe and not staring at bills we can't pay. I'm asking what would you have honestly done if someone offered you $5,000 to do something you knew was wrong but told you there would be no consequences? Really sit with that question for a moment. The next morning, Celeste tried calling Vivian. The phone rang 3 times and went to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Same thing. She sent a text message asking about the money Vivian had promised and asking what she should do now. Vivian didn't respond until later that afternoon, and when she did, the message was short. It said she was sorry things didn't work out and that she thought it was best if they went their separate ways professionally. No mention of the $5,000. No mention of the promise that Celeste's job was safe. No mention of any of it. Celeste read the message 4 times, each time hoping she had misunderstood it. But there was nothing to misunderstand. She had been used and discarded. What Celeste didn't know at the time, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that Vivian had never intended this to be a loyalty test. There was no game. There was no prank. Vivian had been planning to divorce Kellen for over a year. She had been meeting with an attorney named Priscilla Harding, a sharp family lawyer in Midtown who specialized in high-asset divorces. Vivian wanted out of the marriage, but she didn't just want out. She wanted everything. The house. The vacation property. Half of Kellen's business. And to get all of that, she needed leverage. She needed evidence that Kellen had been unfaithful. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, and while infidelity doesn't automatically guarantee a larger settlement, it can influence a judge's decisions about alimony and asset division, especially when combined with the right legal arguments and a sympathetic narrative. Vivian's plan was calculated down to every detail. Get the maid to seduce Kellen, capture it all on the home security cameras, and present the footage in court as proof of an affair. If Kellen had taken the bait that night, if he had so much as kissed Celeste, Vivian would have had exactly what she needed. The footage would have shown her husband in an intimate situation with another woman in their home while she was supposedly away. It wouldn't have mattered that Vivian orchestrated the whole thing. The footage would have spoken for itself. And Celeste, the poor single mother who was just trying to survive, would have been the sacrificial piece in someone else's chess game. But Kellen didn't take the bait. And that's where Vivian's plan started to unravel. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, the way truth tends to work. It doesn't explode. It seeps through the cracks until it can't be ignored anymore. After losing her job with the Ashfords, Celeste scrambled to find work. She picked up shifts at a laundromat in College Park. She went back to cleaning hotel rooms, but the hours were inconsistent and the pay was barely enough to cover groceries, let alone rent. Her car broke down in November, and she couldn't afford to fix it, so she started taking the bus, which turned her 30-minute commute into an hour and 45 minutes each way. She was drowning. But she kept moving because that's what mothers do. They keep moving even when every step feels like it's underwater. In December, she got a job as a server at a restaurant called Avery's, a soul food place in Decatur that had been around for 30 years. The owner, a man named Solomon Avery, was a retired Army veteran who hired people based on character, not resumes. He could tell Celeste was going through something, and he gave her a chance. She started working lunch shifts, and within a few weeks, she was picking up dinner shifts too. The money was better than she expected. The tips were decent, the regulars were kind, and for the first time in 2 months, Celeste felt like maybe she could breathe again. It was a Saturday afternoon in January when Kellen Ashford walked into Avery's. He was alone, which was unusual for him. He usually ate at upscale places in Buckhead or Midtown. But a colleague had recommended Avery's for the fried catfish, and Kellen had grown up eating catfish at his grandmother's kitchen table in Macon, so he decided to give it a try. He sat at a booth near the window and opened his phone. He didn't notice Celeste right away. But she noticed him the second he walked through the door. Her chest tightened. Her first instinct was to ask someone to cover her section, to disappear into the kitchen and hide until he left. But the restaurant was short-staffed that day, and his booth was in her section. There was nowhere to go. She picked up a menu and a glass of water and walked over to his table. When Kellen looked up and saw her face, he froze. For about 5 seconds, neither of them said a word. Then Kellen exhaled slowly and set his phone down. Celeste placed the water on the table and said good afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. Kellen stared at her for another moment and then said her name. Just her name. Celeste. Like he was confirming to himself that she was real. There was a long pause. The kind of pause where you can hear the kitchen clattering in the background and someone laughing 2 tables over and the whole world keeps moving but the 2 people in the conversation are completely still. Kellen looked at her, then looked away, then looked back again. He rubbed the side of his jaw the way people do when they're trying to figure out where to start. Then he said, I didn't expect to see you here. Celeste said, I didn't expect to be here. Another pause. Kellen leaned back in the booth and crossed his arms, not in an aggressive way but like he was bracing himself. He said, can you sit down for a minute? Celeste glanced toward the kitchen, then around the restaurant. It was the tail end of the lunch rush. Things were slowing down. She slid into the seat across from him, keeping her hands in her lap, keeping her eyes somewhere around his collar because looking directly at his face felt like staring into a bright light. Kellen didn't jump to any questions. He just sat there for a moment, studying her like he was reading something written in small print. Then he said, how long have you been working here? She told him since December. He nodded. He asked if she was doing all right. She almost laughed at that. She said she was managing. He looked down at the table and then back up and she could see that he was struggling with something, turning something over in his mind that he wasn't sure how to say out loud. Finally he spoke, and his voice was quieter than before. He said, I've been thinking about that night. A lot, actually. More than I expected to. Celeste's stomach nodded. She didn't respond. She just waited. Kellen continued. He said something about it never sat right with me. The whole thing. The way it happened. He paused again. Then he said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I just need to understand. Celeste nodded, barely. Kellen leaned forward, his forearms on the table. He said, why did you do it, Celeste? Just tell me that. Why would you come into my house dressed like that, acting like that? I trusted you in my home. My wife trusted you. We gave you keys to our front door. And that night you showed up looking like somebody I didn't recognize, talking to me like I was somebody you didn't know. So I'm asking you, not as your former employer, just as a man trying to make sense of something. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Celeste pressed her lips together and looked at the salt shaker on the table. She could feel the weight of everything she'd been carrying for the past 3 months pressing against her chest. Part of her wanted to protect Vivian. Not out of loyalty but out of shame. Because admitting what really happened meant admitting that she had let herself be bought. It meant admitting that her price was $5,000 and a designer dress. But she was so tired of carrying it. She was tired of the lie sitting on her shoulders every morning when she woke up and every night when she tried to sleep. So she started talking. She didn't start with the big reveal. She started small. She told Kellen about the lunches with Vivian. About how Vivian had started asking her personal questions, drawing her out, learning about her debts and her struggles and the daycare bills she couldn't pay. She told him how Vivian gave her $300 one week and how that gift had felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then she told him how Vivian had come to her in the laundry room that Thursday afternoon with a glass of wine in her hand and a plan wrapped in a smile. She told him about the loyalty test pitch, how Vivian had made it sound reasonable, even noble, like a wife who just wanted to know if her husband was faithful. She told him how she had said no the first time. And the second time. And the third. She told him about the $5,000. About the promises that nothing would go wrong, that her job was safe, that it was just a harmless experiment. She told him all of it, every piece, in the order it happened, and she didn't leave anything out because she was done pretending. When she got to the part about the dress, her voice cracked. She said Vivian left it hanging in the guest bathroom with a note that said you're going to look amazing. Like it was a gift. Like it was a favor. Celeste said she put on that dress and stood in front of the mirror and she knew. She knew it was wrong. She said Miss Opal's voice was so loud in her head it was almost physical, like her grandmother was standing right behind her pulling her by the shoulder. But she thought about Amira needing new shoes and Josiah's daycare and the electricity bill she was 2 weeks late on, and she walked down those stairs anyway. She said that was the thing she hated most about herself. Not that she got caught. Not that she lost the job. But that she chose money over her own conscience, and she had to live with that every single day since. Celeste stopped talking. The restaurant noise filled the silence between them. Kellen hadn't moved. He hadn't interrupted her once. His food had arrived at some point during her story and it sat untouched, steam no longer rising from the plate. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition, like he was finally seeing the full picture of a painting he had only seen one corner of. He sat back in the booth and let out a long breath through his nose. Then he rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger and said something that Celeste did not expect. He said, "I owe you an apology." Celeste blinked. She shook her head slightly, like she might have misheard him. But Kellen kept going. He told her that after that night, he had gone straight to Vivian. He called her in Savannah, or at least where he thought she was, and told her everything. And Vivian had reacted with what he now recognized as a performance. She gasped. She cried. She said she felt sick to her stomach. She said she couldn't believe someone she had welcomed into their home would do something so disrespectful. She told Kellen they needed to fire Celeste immediately and never speak of it again. And Kellen, believing his wife, trusting the woman he had been married to for 9 years, agreed. He said he fired Celeste that night without giving her a chance to speak because Vivian had already written the story for him and he accepted it without question. But something about the way Vivian handled it had never stopped bothering him. He said it was too smooth. Too quick. She didn't ask follow-up questions. She didn't ask what exactly Celeste said or did. She didn't seem curious about any of the details. She just wanted it over. She wanted Celeste gone and the subject closed. And that reaction, that particular flavor of urgency, had been sitting in the back of Kellen's mind for months like a stone in his shoe. Now here he was sitting across from the woman he had thrown out of his house, and everything Celeste had just told him confirmed what he had felt but couldn't prove. The way Vivian had insisted on hiring a young housekeeper specifically through a referral she controlled. The way Vivian had been distant and calculated for months leading up to that night. The way she had cried so perfectly, so conveniently when Kellen told her what happened. The way she had immediately suggested firing Celeste, as if removing the maid removed the problem. It all fit now. Every piece of it. Kellen looked at Celeste and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not letting you explain that night. I'm sorry for assuming you were the kind of person who would do something like that on your own. And I'm sorry my wife used you to get to me." He said it plainly, without excuses, without qualifiers. Celeste pressed her lips together hard because if she opened her mouth she knew she would cry, and she was at work and she had 3 more hours on her shift and she couldn't afford to fall apart in the middle of Avery's dining room on a Saturday afternoon. Kellen left the restaurant that afternoon, but he came back the following Tuesday. And the Thursday after that. Not to eat, though he did order something each time. He came back because after his conversation with Celeste, something had shifted in him. A door had opened in his mind and he couldn't close it. He went home that first night and looked at Vivian across the dinner table and saw her differently. Not with anger. Not yet. But with clarity. He started paying attention in a way he hadn't before. He noticed that Vivian had recently changed the password on the home security system. When he asked about it casually, she said the app had required an update and she'd picked a new code. He noticed that a phone number appeared on their shared cell phone bill repeatedly, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, a number that belonged to someone Vivian never mentioned by name. He noticed that she had opened a separate bank account 3 months earlier and had been quietly transferring money into it, small amounts at first, then larger ones. He found the statements tucked inside a magazine in her closet. None of these things were proof of anything on their own, but together they formed a pattern that Kellen couldn't ignore. He hired a private investigator. A man named Cedric Towns, who came recommended by a lawyer friend. Cedric was thorough, discreet, and expensive, but Kellen didn't care about the cost. He needed the truth. Within 2 weeks, Cedric had uncovered enough to confirm everything Celeste had told him and then some. Vivian had been consulting with a divorce attorney named Priscilla Harding since the previous spring. Over 10 months before the incident with Celeste. She had exchanged text messages with a friend named Giselle in which she laid out her entire plan in explicit detail. In one message, Vivian wrote, and I quote, "Once I get the footage of him with the maid, Priscilla says I can push for at least 60% of everything. He won't even see it coming." In another message, sent just 3 days before the night in question, she wrote, "The girl is desperate. She'll do whatever I tell her. All I had to do was wave some money in her face and act like I cared about her kids." Kellen read that message twice. The casualness of it. The contempt. Not just for him but for Celeste. For a woman who had cleaned Vivian's toilets and washed Vivian's sheets and picked up Vivian's dry cleaning for 2 years. That message revealed exactly who Vivian was underneath the smiles and the dinner parties and the social media posts about gratitude and blessings. Cedric also discovered something else. Something that took the situation from calculated to hypocritical. Vivian had been having an affair of her own for over 6 months with a personal trainer named Omari who worked at a gym in Sandy Springs. There were hotel receipts, text messages, and photos that Vivian thought were safely hidden in a locked folder on her phone. They weren't. Cedric was thorough. He also pulled records showing that some of the money Vivian had been transferring to her separate bank account was being used to pay for hotel rooms, dinners, and even a weekend trip to Miami with Omari. She was using Kellen's money to fund her affair while simultaneously plotting to take him for everything he had built. Now I want you to think about the irony of this situation for a moment. Vivian had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to make it look like Kellen was unfaithful so she could take him for everything he was worth in a divorce. But the entire time, she was the one who was actually being unfaithful. She projected her own betrayal onto him and tried to manufacture evidence to support a story that was never true. And the woman she used as a pawn, the woman she threw away like a crumpled receipt, turned out to be the reason the whole truth came to light. If Vivian had just paid Celeste the $5,000 she promised. If she had treated her with even a fraction of basic decency after the plan failed. Celeste might never have been working at Avery's. Kellen might never have walked in. They might never have had that conversation. Vivian's greed didn't just drive her scheme. It guaranteed her downfall. She was so committed to discarding Celeste completely that she created the exact conditions for Celeste to eventually tell the truth. Kellen took everything Cedric had gathered and brought it to his own attorney, a man named Julian Morrow who had practiced family law in Atlanta for over 20 years. Julian reviewed the evidence carefully, the text messages, the financial records, the proof of Vivian's affair, and told Kellen that he had an exceptionally strong case. The text messages between Vivian and Giselle alone showed that Vivian had engaged in deliberate fraud by orchestrating a fake scenario to manufacture grounds for a favorable divorce settlement. Combined with the evidence of her own extramarital affair and the unauthorized transfer of marital funds to a secret bank account, Kellen was in a position to file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. Julian explained that in Georgia, judges have discretion in equitable distribution cases, and evidence of one spouse's dishonesty, infidelity, and calculated deception can significantly influence how assets are divided. He told Kellen that given the totality of the evidence, there was a strong chance Vivian would walk away with far less than she had planned. Possibly nothing beyond what she was minimally entitled to under the law. Kellen filed for divorce in February. Vivian was served papers at the house on a Tuesday morning. She was sitting at the kitchen island eating yogurt and scrolling through her phone when the process server rang the doorbell. Celeste later heard from Kellen that when Vivian opened the envelope and read the filing, her face went white. She called Kellen immediately, crying, asking what was going on, playing the part of the confused and heartbroken wife. "Why are you doing this to us?" she said. "What happened to working things out?" But Kellen didn't engage. He simply told her that his attorney would be in contact with hers and ended the call. He said later that hanging up that phone was the easiest thing he had done in months. When Vivian's lawyer, Priscilla Harding, reviewed the evidence that Kellen's side had compiled, the situation shifted rapidly. Priscilla reportedly advised Vivian to settle quickly and quietly because going to trial would be catastrophic. The text messages in which Vivian described her plan to manipulate Celeste were devastating. They showed premeditation, financial motivation, and a complete willingness to destroy another person's livelihood and dignity for personal gain. The evidence of her affair with Omari eliminated any possibility of Vivian positioning herself as the wronged party. And the secret bank account showed a pattern of financial deception that no judge would overlook. Vivian had no ground to stand on. The very evidence she had tried to manufacture against Kellen didn't exist. And the evidence that did exist pointed directly at her. The divorce was finalized in May. Vivian received a minimal settlement, far less than the millions she had been scheming to get. The house went to Kellen. The vacation property in Hilton Head went to Kellen. His business remained entirely his. Vivian was awarded a small portion of jointly held savings and nothing more. She moved out of the Alpharetta house and into an apartment in Marietta. Her social media, which had once been a curated showcase of luxury and perfection, the matching outfits and the vacation photos and the inspirational quotes about living your best life, went completely silent. The friends who had surrounded her during the good times, the brunch crowd, the women who laughed at her jokes and complimented her house, they quietly disappeared. One by one. That's how it goes sometimes. The people who are there for the lifestyle aren't always there for the life. After the divorce was filed, Kellen reached out to Celeste and asked to meet her at Avery's during her break. He came with an envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000. Celeste pulled it out, read the number, and looked up at him like he had lost his mind. She actually laughed. Not because it was funny but because the number was so far outside her reality that her brain didn't know how else to process it. Kellen told her that the money wasn't charity and it wasn't a gift. He said it was restitution. He said his wife had stolen something from her that night, not just her job but her peace of mind, her sense of security, her ability to trust the people she worked for. He said no amount of money could undo what Vivian did, but he wanted to make sure Celeste and her kids were taken care of while she rebuilt what was taken from her. Celeste tried to refuse it. She pushed the envelope back across the table and said she couldn't take that kind of money, that she didn't earn it, that it wasn't right. Kellen pushed it back and looked at her and said, "Yes, you did. You earned it every single day you showed up to my house and worked hard and treated our home with respect. You earned it by telling me the truth when you had no reason to and every reason not to. You could have lied to me that day. You could have made up a story. But you didn't. And because you told the truth, I found out who I was really married to. So don't tell me you didn't earn it." Celeste cried when she held the check. Not the quiet tears she used to wipe away in the dark so her children wouldn't see. These were different. These were the kind that come when your life finally turns a corner and you realize you survived something that was meant to break you. She didn't waste the money. She paid every debt, fixed her car the right way, moved her children into better schools. And she kept working at Avery's, not because she had to, but because loyalty still meant something to her. Months later, she signed the lease for a small 2-bedroom house in East Point. The first night there, she lay in bed listening to the sound of her children breathing in the next room. And for the first time in a long time, she slept without fear. Not because someone saved her, but because she told the truth when telling the truth cost her everything. Kellen rebuilt his life too. But he never forgot what happened. That's why, later that year, he quietly started a fund for single mothers in Atlanta, women one emergency away from losing everything. He called it the Opal Fund. Celeste found out by accident. And when she did, she sat in the break room at Avery staring at the wall for a long time. Because some acts of kindness are too heavy for words. They still see each other sometimes. Same booth, same fried catfish, sweet tea already waiting on the table. Not love, not romance, just respect, the kind that's earned. Because this story was never about money. It was about power. About what happens when someone looks at your struggle and sees an opportunity instead of a human being. Vivian thought Celeste was too desperate to say no. Too broke to fight back. Too small to matter. But the one thing people like that always forget is that the truth doesn't stay buried. And when it finally rises, everything built on the lie collapses. So I want to ask you, who did you understand the most in this story? Were you angry at Celeste? Or did you feel the weight she was carrying? Did Kellen do enough? Too much? Tell me in the comments, because these stories aren't just stories. They're reflections of real